Hello there, I am Charlotte Smead.
And I'm Emma Smith, and welcome to Autism Sparks, a podcast brought to you by the Autism Dogs charity.
In today's episode, we are going to be looking at a young person's journey to diagnosis and some of the emotions that, as parents, can be experienced in what can be quite a tricky time.
In the back of your mind, kind of what's next? What's the next challenge going to be?
Very stressful, and we were made to feel guilty for asking for an assessment.
And I could not understand why she was howling on the stairs and wouldn't just do what I was asking.
Comes wrapped up in so much trauma.
His needs essentially become your needs.
It's okay if all you do today is survive, like one day at a time, take it on.
We're delighted to have Dan, Alice and Kelly joining us today to discuss and share their experiences with us.
It'll probably come as no surprise to those that are listening that in England in June 2024 there were 187,567 patients with an open referral for suspected autism. And of those, over 87% had that referral open for at least 13 weeks. In fact, the average waiting time for assessment is around 10 months. Charlotte, I know you're up in Scotland there, but I imagine it's a similar picture. What's your experience of the referral procedure?
Absolutely. So the NHS is feeling the strain everywhere, and I think that there'll be a similar picture throughout most of the UK. So I have 3 children, and both my daughters are autistic and have been through the diagnostic journey, but their journeys looked quite different. My middle daughter, Molly, was diagnosed when she was around 7. She was actually diagnosed through the Scottish Centre for Autism after my daughter's hospital had suspected autism. So her route to diagnosis was actually a little bit unconventional. And I didn't really know huge amounts about autism when Molly was diagnosed. It was quite a steep learning curve for my husband and I. I think one of the most beneficial things that I did after diagnosis was a sensory workshop with OTs. It opened up my understanding and helped me in my parenting hugely. My eldest, Elodie, was diagnosed when she was around 13. She was already under CAMHS for anxiety related to school, and our clinician and I both wondered about whether she may be autistic. She presents really differently to Molly, so it wasn't like I was 100% sure that that's what we were looking at. We then filled in the mountain of paperwork that I found a little soul-destroying. So for her assessment, my husband and I actually watched through two-way glass, not really knowing what the clinicians were looking for, as they took Elodie through a series of different tasks, such as telling her to imagine brushing her teeth, and then to act that out. I think with both girls, I felt a sense of relief after diagnosis. Like they could now understand their brains better. I could understand their brains better, and the world around them could too. I found all the clinicians we dealt with to be compassionate, kind and sensitive to the girls. And on the whole, I found the process to be a really positive one. And I'm really grateful for this, as I know that is not everyone's picture. So what about you, Emma? What's your experience been?
Well, I have 3 boys, and I feel now that I've experienced the NHS assessment at all levels. With our youngest son, the conversation of autism was broached at nursery school, and he was assessed as having global developmental delay around 18 months old. But they judged him then too young to label, so they kind of left him with that. And it took us in the end 9 years to reach formal diagnosis. Lots of stumbling blocks in the way and in and out with waiting lists. My eldest son's diagnosis came in the latter half of primary school. It was actually his EHCP assessor pulled us to the side and said, "Do you realise he's autistic?" And me and my husband were like, "Really? I think we guessed." We'd been asking the school up to then for support for about 4 years. But a year later, we had his EHCP and we had his diagnosis. And finally, our middle son, not to be left out, is currently in secondary school and he's on the waiting list for ASD assessment. classically high achieving. He's almost overlooked, bless him, until his struggles became too much. So now we finally face our final weight on the ASD list. Will he get to the top next year? Who knows? But if current estimates go, it's around 18 months in our area. So if this goes well and we're on season 2 or 3, I might be able to update and say we've got there.
Well, as I said earlier, we've got 3 guests in today, and they're going to share their experiences of the diagnostic process. So we've got Dan, who is dad to Charlie, who is 17. They were diagnosed with autism around 5 years ago. Dan is in the Royal Air Force, and his wife Sue is a health visitor specialising in SEN. They have an elder son who has just started his 2nd year at uni. We also have Alice here. Alice is the mum to Horatio, who is 9 years old. Horatio was diagnosed when he was 2 years and 9 months old. Alice used to work for the police, but now works in the automotive industry. She is married to Will, who is a carpenter, and is mum to 2 other boys who are neurotypical and football obsessed. We also have Kelly, a psychotherapist, joining us in the studio. Kelly runs a private practice for teens and adults, as well as providing therapy services for autism dogs. Up until 2022, Kelly also worked in an outpatient CAMHS team in therapeutic roles, so she has a good visual of the service capabilities and also the frustrations of accessing them. Kelly is also mum of 2 teen boys, one neurotypical and one neurodivergent, so brings both a parental and clinical head to her work. But we will be picking both today too, Kelly.
It's fine.
Thank you all so much for joining us here today. Dan, can we head to you first? How did you find the diagnostic process for Charlie?
Very stressful, and we were made to feel guilty for asking for an assessment. We were told that the process would be hard and stressful on our daughter, but the school needed a diagnosis so they could put in place the measures they needed. So we were kind of in that catch. And then we were also kind of had the extra guilt put on that parents often ask for the diagnosis just so they can claim the benefits, which was, well, no, we need help from the school. Anyway, they eventually agreed that they would carry out an assessment, but that didn't, their first part of the assessment they were going to do was the in-school monitoring, but that didn't happen by the end of year 7. Meanwhile, Sue had just graduated as a health visitor, and because I'm in the Air Force, was 8,000 miles away on deployment. And week 2 of year 8, Charlie refused to go to school. And it ended up with Sue's having to take her to A&E because she had put a foot through the door and cut a foot open. That was how the anxieties of going to school meant that the self-harm thing was, I can't go to school, I'm going to do this. So, yeah, we're at crisis point. We then approached CAMHS again, and unfortunately the CAMHS in my area, their autism team had all left. So there was actually at that time no one to do autism assessments. We were then told, and again, I'll be frank, and I was quite shocked by these responses, especially as they were dealing with a fellow health professional. We were told that it probably our fault for trying to make them go to school, which I actually found myself Googling, and the Compulsory Education Act made it compulsory in 1880 for children to go to school. Hindsight now, I can look back and say what they're probably trying to relate to was that if they were sick, if they were coughing or vomiting, we wouldn't make them go to school. And I get that. But then also we would then have a doctor's appointment and they would prescribe something and give them medication to help them. We weren't getting that bit. So, and then the real heartbreaking thing for us was we had found notes. We had found notes of Charlie saying that they didn't want to be in the world. They'd talked about it. They'd openly said that they wanted to take their life. But we were told that they would be on the bottom of the list because they haven't actually tried to do it. They've just talked about it and verbalized it. They've not actually tried to do it. So we were just like, so we were about to buy a house. Well, we had finalised on a house and we had some money set aside for house renovations. So we went private. Yeah, we went to a local company called Shropshire Autism Service. We were initially worried, will people then just think, oh, you paid for the diagnosis? But it turns out that this company was, the doctor was the one that they went to, outsourced it, as for want of a better word. So we met with them, we expressed our fears of that, and we were reassured that wouldn't be the case. And then we went through the process, and it took about 6 weeks from us speaking to them, the initial again, the forms, like you guys were talking about earlier, masses and masses of forms, and trying to remember what they were like when they were 2. Well, I will say once the juices start flowing and you'll start remembering, and it's like, oh yeah, they did that, and so yeah, it took about 6 weeks, and the Shropshire Autism were very supportive all the way through, and to the point where we gave the got the diagnosis. So my view of CAMHS, or BU as they are, is slightly different now, but I'll probably talk about that later. But at the time, it was not a pleasant experience, and that was even before COVID, so they couldn't even blame that.
Dan, that sounds so awful, that journey, and it just, something that you kind of said really resonated with me. But the horrendousness of when you are already in crisis mode and you're already heaping guilt on yourself as a parent, when a clinician comes in and they say something, they don't understand the power of those words, because you're already feeling so vulnerable and like worried about everything that you're doing, and are you making things worse, or are you doing the right things here? And I'm not 100% sure that clinicians always recognize that their words are very powerful and they can really stay with you and really cause quite a lot of harm. But it sounds like your journey was really quite horrific.
Yeah. Without the woe of me, but I said Sue had just started work, literally was 2 weeks into her new job as a health visitor, and me 8,000 miles away, and all we wanted was help. We got the welfare help and support from the Air Force to get me home earlier, etc. And Sue's new job was very understanding, but we needed that help from a clinician, so the school could place things in place. Yeah.
It's shocking to me that so much of the process, so much of just getting that diagnosis, it's those small words at the end of the day, but it comes wrapped up in so much trauma, and it's almost made worse and more traumatic just by the process. Kelly, you have experience not just as a parent, but as a clinician in this. In the terms of the diagnostics process, how did you find the journey with both your hats on? And what do you feel are the benefits and the drawbacks?
That's a big question.
Pressure.
Okay, no pressure. So I guess as a clinician, this is the part where we see the postcode differences. So I'm one county up from you, Dan. I'm in Cheshire, and the CAMHS team has nothing to do with the autism diagnosis process in our area. So we don't have a neurodivergent team. It's not even called that, is it? A neurodevelopmental team. They sit within our community paediatric service, which is in our local hospital. So in terms of being a clinician in the area, we didn't offer anything for autistic young people or any diagnostic services for autistic young people. The best we could do was refer young people in when we spotted things in clinic for young people who hadn't been diagnosed. I guess in that sense, we had to take a lot of flack as a CAMHS team because people were looking to us for a service that we couldn't provide. Family members, friends of mine sat in our local waiting lists and were trying to get referred into CAMHS for support when they were hitting very difficult points at home, when we're thinking about school refusals, meltdowns, parental breakdowns, everything going on. And CAMHS were saying, no, we couldn't help you because they weren't commissioned to. So that's a really tough position to be in as a human, never mind a therapist wanting to work with young people who are presenting with all this kind of stuff. Within that, I did also work privately at the time. So I did see some young people in my private clinic who were on the wait lists and were also looking for care with their mental health. So I was able to do some work in that sense. But from an NHS perspective, the best I could do was support parents on the journey when even the paediatric team was saying, no, we're not sure if this is correct, we haven't got the right information, schools aren't saying that this is likely, because young people don't always present in school, we know this. So as a therapist, I was then able to actually say, well, I see this young person on a regular basis, and these are all the things I'm seeing. And obviously we were having direct conversations with that team, and they were saying, well, if you want to refer somebody, these are all the things we need to know. So we had some really good intel in that sense. And as a private clinician, that helped as well. So in that sense, that was really tough. As a parent going into that process, I guess our journey began really, really young. And probably from about 18 months, 2 years, nursery started picking up on my eldest son's behaviour and his social comms, and primary school also picked up on that. So we were referred in quite early on, but weren't assessed for quite some time. But during the time where they were doing the watching and the waiting, we had some really good clinicians, and the team that actually provided the services to us, which were for ASD and ADHD, were all really supportive, very open, very communicative. So I had no complaints there, really. We were probably quite privileged in that we didn't have huge amounts of behavioural stuff going on to manage. We didn't hit crisis points. We had moments, but largely manageable. And probably because I already worked in that area, I could apply some of that at home as well. So I think one of the things me and my husband said to each other all the time was, gosh, if we didn't know this system, where on earth would we be? I knew who to go to and ask things of. I knew who did what. If you don't know that, then gosh, I couldn't even imagine. Like you say, the paperwork, at least I knew how to fill that in, what they wanted to hear. So that was a benefit. So he came out in the end with a diagnosis of ADHD. They said he didn't have enough to diagnose him as autistic. So we said, okay, we cracked on through primary school. But as we all know, the year 7 hits, and he was the COVID year as well. So they were like barely in school when they did the transition, and things went really downhill. The Senko picked him up. She was really good. She got him back in the system. We did all the watching and waiting. He finally got his assessment. And again, he's not autistic. So he has a language disorder to go with his ADHD, which gives him all of those things that people see that they think he may be autistic for. So we've got a really good broad information about him, really, as to all these things that, yeah, he's neurodivergent. He's been through the autistic assessment process now twice. He's been looked at from every angle I think they can look at him, and this is where he's at. So we can't really fault our system. We've been handled really well. He's got a really good idea as to where he is. He's always thought he's autistic. He has autistic friends. He has autistic TAs at school. And they talk about all their similarities all the time. So for him, he was like, wow, I don't know what to make of that. But he has a good broad understanding himself now. So yeah, so both sides. I didn't like the system as a clinician, but as a parent, I guess the service we got was really good. So it's two sides of the same coin, maybe.
That's amazing,
Is that what you
Kelly.
needed to know?
Thank you.
One of the things that or actually there's two things I was going to pick up there, but one of them Dan had already said, which was you'd both mentioned year 7, which I'm up in Scotland, so we have a totally different schooling system, but I'm presuming that is what I would call high school. So leaving primary school, going into high school. And I just think, you know, there must be other people who are listening who are nodding their head to that, because it is going from being in such a small classroom, having one teacher, having a small area for moving around, to suddenly you are in this huge building. You have lots of people coming around you, lots of smells and sights and sounds, very noisy. Often the uniform is a bit more tricky, so there is a lot of sensory stuff going on. And I think it's probably a common time that, certainly for my eldest, it was the time that I was going, oh my goodness, what are we seeing here? And yeah, I just thought that was really interesting that both of you had picked up on that and we're kind of chatting about it. So yeah.
Alice, Horatio was diagnosed a lot younger than Charlie and Kelly, and in this conversation of moving into the latter half of primary school. What was your experience like with a younger child?
Yeah, so Horatio developed quite typically up until the age of about 12 months. And then he's my second child. There'd been a bit of an age gap between him and the first. So I did kind of know what I was expected, but as we all do, you can kind of start comparing your children to friends or people in the family, etc. And I have a niece who's the same age. And it became very obvious between the age of about 12 to 15 months, there was an obvious digression with regards to his skills and his development. The biggest one was a complete loss of words and speech. So he probably had about 10 words. And I've got videos of him babbling, saying hello, bye, all those typical clapping your hand videos. And then at the age of 15 months, it was like it was lost overnight. It was literally like someone put a light switch on and it was just gone. And after initial conversations I had with a health visitor initially, because I actually was pregnant at the time, we were referred to GP and then we were referred to audiology, as they actually thought he was potentially deaf. And so because he just completely switched off and actually was kind of in his own world, that was their thought process. So we went through the process of the audiology service at our local hospital, which is supported by the Elizabeth Foundation, which were amazing. But the first two tests were inconclusive. It proved very difficult to kind of get any type of testing done on any child of that age, let alone now looking back at the child with, neurodiverse. So it was during this period that other signs kind of came to a head, such as fixation and spinning on a spot, or obsessions with regards to certain areas of the house, or he's very sensory stimulated, so he puts his head between his legs and wants to be upside down all the time. So that, again, they still started to think that could be linked to the vestibular system, and as he trying to kind of get that balance. And again, it's hearing. But I started kind of looking more into that and kind of looking at what can impact that. And every Google rabbit hole I went down kept landing on autism. And it's dangerous, obviously, doing that. At the time, I just knew it was something more than what they thought it was. So during one of the most difficult appointments with the audiologist, it was a lovely lady, and she looked at me and she just said, "Have you ever thought this might be something else?" And she didn't have to say anything else. And I was like, yes, I have. And then she referred us back, and our system's the same. It's community pediatrics. So we were referred to the community pediatricians. We had to wait 6 months to be seen. And I know that isn't long when you compare to what some people's journeys are, but it was the longest 6 months I felt ever. Especially because there was that obvious digression of skill. So I felt like he was kind of slipping away in front of us, and we couldn't really do anything about it because we didn't really know what was kind of happening. So you did feel pretty helpless, to be honest, within that 6 months. And at the time, I couldn't afford to go privately. I was working for the police. I was on maternity leave. It just wasn't, unfortunately, an option for us. So we had to just wait. And then eventually the community pediatricians got involved. I think that was March 2017. So Horatio was about 21 months old then, which again is very young. In hindsight, people say to me always, he's been diagnosed so young. They planned like basic blood investigations and referred us to speech and language and portage, because he had very obvious kind of classic autism signs, I guess, the lack of language and a very obvious kind of digression with regards to his social skills, no communication. There was quite a lot of visual signs with him, which made it obvious as such. So in a way, they referred us to speech and language and portage because he was too young to be at school, and he was too young to be at nursery because he was less than 2 years old. That did help. But then they said, we'll review in another 6 months' time. So again, it kind of just felt like they were kind of pulling it out to try and wait and see. And similar to what Dan says, it feels like wait till you fail before we'll help you. Wait till you get to that crisis point before actually anyone will get involved. So portage were amazing. I don't know if that's something just local to Hampshire, and I don't think it's even still in Hampshire anymore, but they're in early bird stages before school, and our portage worker was really, really helpful. But another 6 months down the line, they put some things in place to try and get us on a path of understanding. But it turned into another year. It was a year basically after the paediatricians got involved to get that full diagnosis. So we got it in March 2018. And like I say, it was 2 years, 9 months. And so a year after they got involved. And I felt that there was a lot of time that was wasted within that year with little to no action, because there was no schools involved. There was no EHCP. There was no nursery settings. I had to try and find a nursery setting that would accept him and take him in with his needs, which meant I had to drive over an hour away every morning for him to go to nursery for 3 hours. So then it just the impact of all of that on other children and work and things like that. But I think the year did go quickly, but it also went slowly. I know that sounds so stupid, but because you're counting down, you want that answer. And I strongly feel now that early intervention is key, especially with children like Horatio. And knowing what I know now, I think that dragging out the process, we missed key opportunities to possibly engage with him. So looking back, I wish I'd pushed a bit harder maybe, but I didn't know. Like Kelly says, having that knowledge, I think, is key. If you don't know, you just got to kind of go with it and hope for the best. But I think the biggest thing, and you probably talk about this a little bit more with your other questions, but it was after the diagnosis that I found the hardest, because it's that build up and then it's like, okay, and now what? And it wasn't what I was expecting.
We can all agree that the process of waiting can be quite an ordeal, the kind of unsure. I think it's that feeling of being unsure. Is there a diagnosis here? Is there not? Am I seeing things correctly? Am I not? I think once you have a diagnosis as well, there's so much more open to you in terms of support from school, from the council. And so it can be a really stressful time. We've already talked about the paperwork, the assessment process. So afterwards, I suppose, is what we're looking at now. And Alice, you kind of suggested that it's maybe not been something that was quite a hard situation for you. So yeah, chat to us about, were you signposted to helpful places? Did you get support after diagnosis?
I think with me, it's very different because of the age of Horatio when he was diagnosed. Obviously, he was less than 3 years old, so he was very young. We were in a specialist nursery setting, which were amazing. And I'd love to say that we did, but I distinctly remember going into the appointment, being given some paper pamphlets and walking out more confused than when I went in. I felt there'd been that huge build up and then nothing. Like I was expecting, like, yes, doors open, everyone's going to be, fighting over us to get us into things and supporting us. And I presumed there'd be the start of something and the gateway to more support, but I actually felt the complete opposite with him. It felt like they'd done their job. You sit in that box, you've got that paperwork, now get on with it. And I guess I shouldn't have been surprised as the support was stagnated and difficult to access while waiting for diagnosis. So therefore, should I've really expected the piece of paper to change that? Naively, I did. Like I said, we had a really good support system from the Portage service because he wasn't in school, which was amazing. But I think that was a very specific individual that really made that world of difference. I now know there's some great resources out there. And I think social media is great, and looking on people that I follow now, which would have been really helpful and supportive at the time. But I think because he was so young, it was like he fell between the gaps because he wasn't at a school. And so therefore they didn't have like a Senko or anyone at school to kind of help support him. And it just kind of felt like off you go into the big bad world and make your own way. And then interestingly, I remember the paediatricians, as soon as they diagnosed him, they wanted to discharge him. So we got the diagnosis, and literally, I would say within 2 weeks, they sent me a letter saying we're now going to discharge. And I was like, how can that be the process? Because just because he's now diagnosed, surely that means he needs that ongoing support. But they were like, yeah, but that doesn't sit with us as a community paediatricians. And it's like, well, where does it sit then? And it's like, well, ideally, he should have a social worker, and a social worker should be involved, or he'd be under the community like CAMHS. But because he was so young, we kind of didn't fit into any of their flows. And to be honest with you, I don't know even if he was older, it would have necessarily been any different. I think it felt very much of, you're off our books now, we've done our job, and off you go, deal with it.
The very first paediatrician that we saw, I think he was about 5 years old, something like that. And it was that moment where you think, we've been on a waiting list now for quite some time. We're finally going to speak to a person who literally looked at all the information that they'd already got from school and nursery and us and said, yeah, looks like there's some signs here. We can, put you in the right direction on the pathway. But you've also got to face it that if he gets the diagnosis, you'll be given a piece of paper and that'll be the lot.
Yeah.
So we were given the heads up pretty early on.
Yeah.
They were so clear about it.
And that's helpful, isn't it? Because you know what to expect then a little bit, I guess. I think I was on this kind of false narrative of it was going to be something that it wasn't. And I think what didn't help is the only kind of reference I had to someone with autism was my mum's best friend, whose son is now, mid-30s. And he's not as severe with regards to his behavioural signs and behaviours that Horatio is. But I think he was in an era of the Blair era where there was lots of money thrown at autism, and it was literally like the floodgates opened and everything happened. So when I'd been talking to her about it, she was like, you fight that diagnosis and then it will make a difference. And I just felt like I flat on my face, like, okay, well, what do I do now? And where do I go? And help. So I think, it very much depends on the knowledge that we've got. Knowledge is power, isn't it? And like you say, if you don't know it's coming, then you don't know what to expect.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I wonder as well if it's variable. So with my middle daughter, who was diagnosed first, it was very similar to what you're talking about. She was diagnosed and literally we were discharged that same day because it was the Scottish Centre for Autism. They only saw you for diagnosis and that was you. And I do remember reading a book. I don't know whether it was recommended from them or whether I just came home and went on Amazon, but I remember reading a book and thinking, actually, this doesn't really resonate with my daughter. What does that mean? But with Elodie, she was diagnosed through CAMHS, and there was this kind of debrief or this plan or this, they linked in with the school, they met with Elodie several times. And it helped because it meant that you could chat through things and you could have that space to go, okay, what's the next step? And so we did get the pamphlets, we did get the signposting to different websites, but there was also these meetings and I found them so helpful because actually we could take a minute and go, and in fact, that's what they said is, what is your picture? You've got this diagnosis. What does that look like for you? Not all autistic individuals look the same. So let's work out what that looks like for you. And that was a really helpful period. And in fact, a speech and language therapist came in at that point and also kind of was part of the picture. So I wonder if it's just really variable depending on where your services are. And I think it's really, really needed because especially after Molly, I was on this really steep learning curve. And I think that having a bit of a space and a pause and a time to go, okay, let's work out what this means is actually really, really positive. Do you feel that you and Sue and Charlie were given good support after diagnosis? What was your experience?
Very much like Alice, we got the diagnosis, and I was like, "Woo, right, okay, everybody, come to me." And no, that we quickly realised that over the first 2 weeks, that's not going to happen. But we did go back to CAMHS because I kind of thought, right, we got the diagnosis. Will they be able to get them on a list for some kind of therapy or something? But again, we were kind of pushed back a little bit there. We then, the Shropshire Autism Service offered us sessions on a kind of a CBT type of journey, but we could only really afford one a month. And anyone that's been down the CBT journey knows you need one a week. And so they weren't really proving beneficial. And then COVID happened. And so that kind of, as we all know, put a pause on a lot of things happening. We were signposted to groups in the area. There's quite a lot of groups around Telford. They're quite good for that. But Charlie's anxieties and fear almost of leaving the house was so high that even the thought of attending one of those groups was causing anxieties as well. So, yeah, we had signposting, but it wasn't really something that we felt Charlie would be able to engage with and even get them out of the house. Obviously, the autism dogs, and as soon as we got Aldo, and that changed our life a lot, well, massively. But then, if I kind of fast forward now, that we had another crisis moment, Christmas of 21, and then from that. We eventually managed to get onto an emergency waiting list, which was 5 months. And they now have occupational therapy, and they have melatonin, and I'll probably say this wrong, fluoxetine. It's the medicine for anxieties, and that's helping a lot. They've had a year off. They started college last year without any GCSEs or anything, but they started college and they struggled, so they've been given a year off. So they had a year off to help their mental health, and they've started back again, and they are thriving. That year away from school, that year away, just to sort themselves out in their head, get the therapy that we needed. We didn't want them to have medication, but it's proved it's helped. So we've had that, and they're there now. It's good, but at the time, as COVID was happening, then there wasn't lots we could really achieve. And then COVID was around, and then the Black Lives thing erupted as well, and it was quite a scary place. Why would you want to leave the room? Why would you want to leave the house, or let alone to go out? Because the world's scary. During COVID, we managed to stay at home because we had to, so it was okay. But again, sorry, I know we might go off piste a little bit, but your kids, do they have their online world is their safe place? And then during school closures,
Absolutely.
They were kind of bringing the scary school place into their safe place, so they couldn't engage with online learning either. And so, yeah, they were very, very delayed on their education. But to spin that round, they're there now. It's going well. We're not fully out the woods, but we feel we're in a much better place, and we're really proud of the progress they're making. And sometimes, they weren't ready to take their GCSEs at that time, and we feel after a year or so at college, they will be in a good place to do it. And so they haven't taken it when they were supposed to, but they will, and we feel they have a future now, if that makes sense.
All of us were nodding our head, especially when you're talking about having an online community. And I think during COVID, it was this reinforced message. The outside world is scary. Stay inside. That's good. And I mean, my kids absolutely loved that, and I think then everyone was due just to go back into school and into routine. And I think that was just such a tricky thing to ask of so many young people. And I mean, that's what we're seeing across the country is absence rates have just skyrocketed since COVID. And it's not because kids don't want to be educated. So I think it's absolutely wonderful to hear that Charlie is doing well at college, and I am in complete agreement that sometimes you just need to take a unique path and you'll still get to where they're meant to get to, but just having the confidence to go, do you know what, this is our own route, and we've got to kind of make that our own route, and that's okay.
Well, it kind of sums up autism, doesn't it? That autism, it's a different way, isn't it? It's their unique way of doing things and their unique way of looking on life, and therefore their paths to achieve will be different from the norm. And embrace it, accept it, and that's the thing.
Dan's cheered me up tonight because I found it very hard to accept over the last few months that there's not more of a triage for children who are on the list. With the difficulties with my middle child, he just end up at the bottom of the list and you work your way up. That's how it works where I am. So it's quite heartening to hear Dan say that there was an emergency section, because it's something me and my husband have been discussing, saying, why not? Why isn't there this? So it's nice that there are them somewhere in the country.
Yeah, no, that is really difficult that you're not getting the support when you need the support. It's really, really difficult. Kelly, coming to you from a more clinical perspective, do you feel that there are good resources for parents after diagnosis? Do you feel like there needs to be more in place to support families?
Yeah, absolutely. I hear through the Autism Dogs Network, actually, because I've probably spoken to every parent who has come through the system, that everybody from across the country has had such different experiences. And yet the majority, probably over 90%, all say the support post-diagnosis was non-existent or minimal. Whatever postcode you're in, you're more than likely not to get a great support network beyond diagnosis. In terms of families I see, I mean, now working in private practice, I largely work with young people who are making sense of themselves after diagnosis, and families as well. So young people that I work with have often come through the school system, really struggled in year 7, been through the process. Nobody's realised, that they're autistic. This is a new concept to them. They might not have met an autistic person before, have no idea what this means and what on earth this means for the rest of their lives. So that is a service, a support that I think would be so valuable to young people coming through the system for a start, and for the parents coming through with them. Again, okay, I was a parent who came through the system, what my son's diagnosis meant and what he could probably access in the community and what I could access as a parent. So parenting courses that were specific to kids with different neurodiversities, and speaking to the Senko in the school and working out exactly what their strategies were, and were they going to work, and if they weren't going to work, what did they need? So bringing in more information into the schools and taking information back from the schools as well. I think one of the things I often hear with my working alongside my colleague Laura, who is a special educational needs teacher, she talks about strategies that work so well in school and then they don't get sent home, and then the child kind of has 2 separate places to try and work out, and if some things are working in school, why aren't they coming home, and vice versa. So it's those kind of simple things that we can all be doing after diagnosis. There are online things and they're not going to match everybody. So the standard ones are the NHS and looking at the local services your NHS provides, the National Autistic Society. Autism Speaks is a good one. I don't know if any of you have seen that one. They have loads of toolkits online. The Autism Society is really useful. I guess in my area, and it will be similar in yours, Alice, I think you've mentioned this, is the external services from the NHS, or ones that are set up in the charitable sector, are quite often the ones that pick up parents, families, children after diagnosis and can provide parent groups, people to speak to who get it, who've been through it, who might be in the same position, and also provide social opportunities for the kids who might then wish to find young people who are similar to themselves. Some do, some don't. I'm thinking of a local service here actually that is called Autism Inclusive, and they invite clinicians in. So OTs, diagnosing clinicians, speech and language therapists, to hold kind of brief clinics for parents who are either diagnosed or in the system, just to go and ask questions, get strategies, get techniques, because you don't have direct access to these kind of people. So local services can be an absolute goldmine if you just go and see what's out there. There's a really good website. It's an Australian website called Reframing Autism. It's got loads of workshops and webinars on there. So that, again, is a really good one if you've got time just to sit and just take in some information, basic stuff. And again, a lot of us will have done our research and know a lot, but there is always new research coming out. So those kind of websites actually do keep things up to date. So I'm always learning new stuff from them. They're really good. Different for everybody, but you've absolutely just got to research everything and overturn every stone you can to get yourself as knowledgeable as you possibly can, because the services aren't there right now. There's no standardized system.
I agree. From what Kelly just said, Horatio is non-verbal mainly. He communicates via kind of gesture and kind of some pecks, but pecks is a whole other sensory profile because of the Velcro, and he likes the stickiness, and then he eats six, he's pica, so it's all different, other challenges of it. It was over a year ago, I, like you say, did this research online, and America, as much as it can be forward thinking, it can be backward thinking as well as some of the stuff they do, but there's something called a gestalt language processor, and that's what Horatio's been diagnosed with. And I went to his speech and language and said, I think this is him, and they'd never heard of it. And that was NHS, and our county one had never heard of it. And now, a year later, this summer, they've all been given training on gestalt language processors, and they're like, I agree, he is one. Can we use him? But you're like, yes, that's great. But like you say, you have to kind of like cart and horse, what comes first sometimes. But it's like you say, education and trying to find the resources. That it's a full-time job just to try and keep on top of what's out there, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Trying to put everybody in the same box, it becomes overly done. Autism for some on paper might apply the same way to everybody. The example is that my son's school right now, they have to have an approved school fidget, and they all have to have the same with the school logo on. And it's kind of like, would that really apply to every child in the same way? It's so crazy. That it's hilarious. Some of the things that are coming out, I'm just like, it's so funny. But with what Kelly said, what Dan said, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for outside networks. Shout out to Unique Ways, who's our, charity funded support for parents. Absolutely amazing. We couldn't have done anything without them, basically. What I wanted to say was, it can be such a difficult time for families. All the assessments, the diagnosis and everything, it's so overwhelming. We've all been through it and we all roll our eyes. But internally, when you finally get that diagnosis, and you might think, yay, or oh my goodness. Kelly, what were some of the emotions you felt when your son was diagnosed? Just yourself.
There's definitely relief there. That sense of, okay, well, it's on paper now. We can stop trying to fight his corner in some cases, and this might then help him access certain things in school that he needs. But it's like a really double-edged sword, isn't it? You get the relief and it's like, okay, well, we know this now, and he'll be able to access certain things because of this. But there's anger at the system, it being so long. And certainly, Dan, I can appreciate that the experiences that you had along your journey, then I think as a parent, I'd be furious. And sadness that, okay, this is what we wanted to have written down because that explains what's going on, but he's actually got to live with that. And those difficulties are going to be with him for a really long time, if not all throughout life. So that process of reimagining your role as a parent, reimagining their journey in life, I think I felt a bit of grief, and I can certainly, speaking to other parents, that's something that comes up quite a lot, that when you are pregnant and expecting a baby, you have certain things that you imagine. It's a difficult process sometimes to then turn that around and reimagine what it's going to be, and it can be really positive, and often is. But I think when a diagnosis is landed, it can feel really difficult. We might want it, but we don't want it, all at the same time.
My husband and I often talk about redefining normal, what normal looks like for us. And I think that, as you say, it is really positive, but actually there's times when you have to readjust what your natural expectations maybe were. And that can be a tricky thing to kind of have to realign. I don't think it's a process you do once. You almost have to keep revisiting it. And sometimes you'll come across a new milestone, or, my eldest, all her peers are off to uni. So all I'm seeing on Facebook is uni pictures. And it's completely wonderful that she's got her own journey and her own path. But it's a redefining normal moment for us, you know, years after diagnosis. So it's definitely something that's a process that you kind of keep having to revisit.
I don't know if any of you have read, there's a poem called Welcome to Holland. Have any of you read that? It's by a lady called Emily Kingsley, and she's said she often gets asked to describe the experience of raising a child with a disability. And it's a poem, and it's talking, like Kelly said, about you're going to have a baby, you're planning a fabulous vacation. It's like planning a fabulous vacation to Italy. You buy the guidebooks, you make your plans, you're going to go see the Colosseum, you're going to see the gondolas. You get on the plane after months of kind of planning, the day arrives and the flight attendant says, "Welcome to Holland." And you go, "Holland? What the hell? I'm not going to Holland. Well, I didn't sign up for Holland. I'm going to Italy, you know." And there's a change of flight path and they've landed in Holland and there you must stay. And the important thing is you haven't taken to a horrible place. It's just different. So you must go out and buy new guidebooks and you learn a new language and you new group of people, and it's just a different place. But like you say, there's a significant pain that comes with not ever going to Italy. But if you spend your life mourning that fact that you didn't get to Italy, you're never going to enjoy Holland. So it's a really lovely poem, but it puts it into kind of perspective, because I think, like you say, there is a sense of kind of grief and mourning that plan of what you thought was going to happen. But yeah, I suggest reading it. It's really good.
Yeah, I've got to look that up.
I was just going to say that I love that so much, and it really resonates with me because, yeah, we had exactly the same feeling of like loss and where are we going? But we had that feeling as well that as we've grown with it and as we've learned with our children and everything that they've been through, that in the terms of what Alice just described, that possibly me and my husband were always in Holland all along ourselves and just didn't realise it.
And a few things made sense. Like, for example, they couldn't go to bed until all their teddies were perfectly lined up and in the exact order. And when their playtime, they had all their horses lined up and they never actually played with them. Their playtime was lining them up. And it was like, so that makes sense now. So it's like all these things. But then came a little bit of guilt in a way that we hadn't pushed earlier on. But then, you know, the great person, and we always had, they're such a lovely person, and they're a bit quiet and shy, or they're daydreaming today. But all these things then started adding up. And then main one I have really is pride, because we didn't get the diagnosis until they're in year 8, so they've gone all the way through primary school. They've done really well in their SATs, despite of this thing that they didn't know they had. We now know they've masked their way through school every day. And therefore, when they got home, the meltdowns, the rages would occur. But then they picked themselves back up and went in next day and masked again. So it's like, well done you for doing that. You know, well done. Not knowing why. Yeah.
It's funny, Dan, you talking about guilt, because I definitely would identify with that, but slightly differently, because I can strongly remember needing to go in for a hospital appointment and saying to Molly, you must wear these certain clothes. The doctors needed to check all her joints and they'd asked for her to, I don't know, wear leggings. I can't remember, right? So I was like, no, we can't leave this house until these are on. And I could not understand why she was howling on the stairs and wouldn't just do what I was asking. They were perfectly acceptable leggings. And I think I felt a bit of guilt after that when I understood that was actually completely beyond her ability to be able to put on these leggings from a sensory point of view, what that meant. So I think there was an element of guilt from me that, I just didn't understand. And I wish that I had understood earlier, because I would have parented differently. And I think Molly, my middle daughter, you know, she was the first diagnosed. And I think once one of your children's diagnosed, it kind of changes your parenting all throughout. So I think Elodie probably benefited from that, because when she would be like, I cannot wear these tights, I'd be like, of course you can't. That's fine. I understand that now. And so I definitely look back with a bit of guilt of not understanding things better at that point, if that makes sense.
I think that's just being a mum or being a parent, isn't it? There's that constant guilt, because no matter what you do, you just think it's not good enough, and that's kind of ingrained into you, isn't it? I mean, I think similar to you, I had that kind of guilt of I should have pushed for that and I should have done this, and it's the shoulda, woulda, couldas, isn't it? But it does hit you emotionally. And up until Horatio had got his diagnosis, I was just coping with things. I was just getting on with things, and I've kind of numbed myself to everything, I think, because I was just on the edge of it. And I think I remember when he got the official diagnosis, felt like, okay, yeah, this is the start of something. And I felt like I could go back to a bit of normality. I'd been on maternity leave, and I remember going back to work and being actually really looking forward to going back to work to try and find a part of myself again, because you lose yourself, don't you? Being a parent, you do it anyways. And I think because at the time I was working in the police, and because of the role in the police that I was in, it didn't work with the shifts that Horatio had for nursery. So I had to end up going into another role, which was quite a highly stressful role because it was in the control room. So I went back into a role that I used to love, but I was in a place that I found myself unable to cope with it anymore because my emotional state wasn't aligned. And so therefore I couldn't deal with other people's emotions because I felt like I can't help you. I can't even help myself, and I can't help my son. So how am I going to help somebody else? And I think like Dan said, I went to some CBT therapy, and learning about how your body responds to stress, and how it's impossible to avoid stress. We all have stress, especially when you've got a child with any kind of disability or special needs. But that constant fight for kind of diagnosis, I think, had heightened me up so much that it's like we all have that bathtub, don't we? And we all have that tap that's constantly dripping and making our stress levels higher. But it's fine as long as you've got the plugs and everything working properly. But when you're all clogged up because it's just constant, before you know it, you're overflowing with stress. And I think I had that. I ended up having a huge panic attack at work after Horatio's diagnosis, and I ended up being signed off work for quite a long time because I just couldn't deal with other people's problems or other things outside of my kind of arena, because I was just overwhelmed. And looking back now, I can kind of see and understand that. But I think at the time I was being really judgmental to myself because I was like, well, nothing had happened. Like there was no trigger. Like I had a panic attack at work for literally no reason at all. It wasn't like I had something stressful, but it's understanding that it's kind of out of your control. You feel out of control. So therefore it's your brain's kind of way of protecting yourself, I guess. But yeah, I think I felt a little bit guilt and failure as such because I feel like I lost part of myself as part of the diagnosis process, and it took me a while to kind of get back to me after that.
Yeah, I'm sure that we could all identify with that. I feel like it's been the past couple of years that I've actually found that I've started to take a little bit of time to understand who I am again after probably 15 years of intensity. And I think just everything you said there, Alice, I just was like nodding my head along to. Thanks for sharing.
No, you're welcome. I think we're all part of it, aren't we? It takes a village to raise a child, and this is our village, isn't it? So we've got to embrace it.
Yeah. We had a family support worker early on when the kids were at primary school, and I always remember him saying that whatever's going on with your child with special needs, and we were trying to manage ADHD at the time, said your whole family has to just adapt to the new timetable, that his needs essentially become your needs, and you all move in that way. And if you do that, you have got to find a way for each of you to get off that train now and again and do your own thing. That all being in the same bubble will help, but at the same time you've got to pop out of the bubble and do the new things. And it just always sticks in my mind that it's so true that if you fight against the diagnosis and the needs and having to adapt everything, then it's really difficult. If you go with it and find your flow, great, but it's not your needs. You've got to go and get yours met outside of the bubble. Definitely.
I always remember one of my friends, I think was having a bit of a breakdown with it all and everything, and she turned around to me, and we'd gone and met up just in the park, and she turned around to me and I was like, I just feel like I'm failing. I'm not I'm not coping, I'm not doing anything, And she says to me, she says, I've come here with, my daughter, I've packed a bag, I've brought her to the park, she's got a coat on and shoes on. And she went, you have 1,000 different things in case your son has a meltdown or needs a certain texture or needs a certain thing. She says, to leave the house, she says, you had a million thoughts of what ifs that I don't have. And it's probably the first time I've sat back and just thought how different parenting is for ASD. The amount of things that we have additionally that run through his minds, the what ifs, the maybes, the preparations. It's just so, no wonder we are all a bit stressed.
Yeah.
I think for all of us now, there's been quite a few years since diagnosis. So I suppose we want to look at how your mindset has changed from that point of diagnosis to kind of where you are just now. So Dan, if we come to you first, how do you feel your mindset has changed since diagnosis?
I still find it hard sometimes. I do. Why can't they get out of bed now? Or we've got to be on time in we've got to leave the house in 5 minutes. They're still in bed. So I kind of have to adapt. And I don't always get it right, and I'll put my hands up on. Don't always get it right, but sometimes I try. You know what? I saw The Last Leg. I don't know if you guys watched that. And about a year or so ago, Scottish comedian Fern Brady was on, and she's autistic, and she was talking about autism, and she describes autism as a different operating system. So the difference between Android and iOS, so a Samsung phone or an Apple phone. And when I heard that, it was like, that was the light bulb moment in my head. But I get it now. Yeah, they look the same. They do exactly the same thing, but they just do it a different way. And now I kind of get that's there. But I have to say, kudos to Autism Dogs. They are very good at educating me on what Charlie's going through, and then kind of putting me back in my box and saying, Dad, you've got to give them okay, all right, okay, thank you guys, thank you, yeah, all right. So but the other main one really, again, you guys probably have this well, the limited diet. Sue talks about this as well as a health visitor, and she's dealing with children, Alice, your age kids, and parents are in a flap about they're only eating this, and obviously the health visiting guidelines saying they must have this. But our view as an autistic person is, are they eating? Done. So what? They've had pasta and cheese for 5 days in a row. They have eaten. Then that's it. That's fine. Doesn't matter if they haven't had a. Sometimes I'll joke and say, can you just look at a carrot and hopefully you'll get the thing through osmosis. But yeah, we have adapted. But funnily enough, our son turned vegetarian about the same time as we got autism diagnosis. So we've come quite adept at making 3 different meals, 3 different, like a restaurant at meal times. So yeah, you adapt. But like what Kelly was saying, you try and keep the same things that you make you. So I personally can't go a week without having a burger or a steak or something. So we make those meals as well as the vegetarian meal and a separate meal for Charlie, and it's just become part of our thing now. So yeah, you adapt. You adapt because we do because that's what happens. And yeah, that's my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know, in our house, we have these meals and I call them unicorn meals because they're the meals that everyone will eat, and they're unicorn meals because they're that rare. I can completely identify with that restaurant feeling of 3 separate meals on the go. And also the beige food. I don't know what it is about pasta and cheese, although personally I love pasta and cheese myself. But yeah, I completely identify with everything you've said there, Dan. Alice, what about you? How's your mindset changed as Horatio's kind of grown older?
I think since it has changed significantly, I think it's just been a knowledge is power journey as such, because I didn't know anything about it, and you thrown in the deep end in your sink or swim situation. So you kind of have to adapt, like Dan says, otherwise you don't survive. And like I said, I think what we were just talking about, I've accepted it's okay to kind of mourn part of your life that isn't as you expect it to be. With Horatio's needs, they are quite significant. So he is non-verbal still. He's 9 years old. Is he ever going to be verbal? Probably not. He's probably going to live with us the rest of his life. He's always going to need some kind of support. So the mindset has changed since diagnosis, but there's always in the back of your mind kind of what's next, what's the next challenge going to be. I used to care so much about what people thought, and I don't anymore, because you don't have the headspace for it. So it's like you kind of numb yourself to anyone outside your bubble, like Kelly says. But I do think it's so important to jump out of that bubble, because like you say, otherwise it pops and then everything goes wrong. But I no longer care what other people think. I think the process has made me quite strong-willed, very steadfast. I understand there's now beauty in the adversity and try and embrace it. Like Dan says, I do not do it all the time, and I get it wrong 100%. So I think that's normal. You just think sometimes, like, why can't you just do this or whatever it is? And you just think you have to try and embrace it, because you haven't got any other choice really, I guess, do we? But I have definitely changed my mindset. I think it's just constantly changing, and I think that's the important thing. It's learning all the time and being open to different ways. And it's like with autism dogs, I think Horatio was probably one of the youngest when he got Dave. And obviously because he's non-verbal as well, and his needs are quite significantly different. They've been so amazing at adapting to that as well, and understanding that it's not one size fits all. And sometimes people will say to us with regards to Dave, well, what does he actually do? And it's like, it's what he's doing right now that you can't see. If he's not there, like before we had Dave, Horatio was in a wheelchair buggy everywhere. He was transported in a wheelchair buggy because he was a bolter. He would run the opposite way. He would lie down on the floor. He wouldn't move. You couldn't go to the shops. You couldn't pop in anywhere. You couldn't do anything. And I think that change of mindset as well is you adapt. You know that you can't just pop into the shop to get milk on the way home. You know that you have to think about things way in advance of when they are. I messaged my friend yesterday and said something about fireworks tonight, and she was like, oh my God, what are you talking about? Fireworks? Like, it's still September. And I was like, yeah, but I'm thinking already, like, the noise, can he do that? And he likes the sensory side of it, but trying to think of adaptations and ways you can go. And like I say, it's constant. Your mind, it's like a swan. I always think, like, up close you think they look all serene, but underneath it's like, what's going on? You've got to pedal quick, otherwise you sink. So yeah,
I absolutely love the fact that you have got to a place where you don't care what others think, because it's probably one of my biggest feelings. I'm up at 3 a.m. replaying something in a meeting that I was in. Or even worse, I'm trying to sentence by sentence tell my husband and ask him what he's thinking all the time. Did I say the right thing? I think I missed this bit. What do you think they think about? And I absolutely wish that I was somebody who was like, I don't care. And I'd love to be more like that, but I'm definitely not there yet. But I love the fact that you are, Alice. That's amazing.
It's taken time, and my husband's the complete opposite. I think the diagnosis has made him worry about what people think more. He's still very conscious when people look, and I just don't even see it. I don't even see it anymore, which is very different to what I used to be like. I would be very self-conscious of it. It's different personalities as well, isn't it? I don't think it's a bad thing having that. It's just we always want what we aren't, don't we? That's the thing.
Yeah. Oh no, I definitely feel very envious of you, Alice. I think that is the pinnacle of, like, if I can make it to that at some point in my life, I'm going to feel I made it.
I remember the point it turned in our house when, well, it wasn't even in our house. I was out with Jude one day and we were walking across the town square. It was really busy and there was a child on the floor going for it, really shouting, really screaming. And their parent or their grandparent was just stood next to them waiting for it to pass. And we wandered by and Jude just looked at me and said, well, at least it's not me today. and on we walked. And I thought, yeah, great. Oh well, matter of fact. And I thought, yeah, I need to be more like you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Take the small wins.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that broke that bubble. don't worry about it.
I think
one day your child will be throwing things around and having a stomp on the floor, and you are conscious of all the looks you're getting from everyone else in the shop. And then the next day, your child is perfectly well behaved, walking by your side, and some other poor parent, their child's having a tantrum on the floor. And sometimes all you just want to do is go up and give them a hug and go, "Don't worry, mine was like that yesterday." And then, but in the moment, you're just like, "Ah."
Yeah.
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 Just before we move on to our final question, Kelly, I suppose you've been in a position where we haven't really, where you've gone through the diagnostic process twice and that's changed during the second process. How have your emotions changed since that, since kind of, that coming away from it? Do you feel like you might be going through the diagnostic process again, or where's your feelings in terms of since the diagnosis that your son has?
I think going through the process the second time, with everybody saying to us who was involved with him, saying, yeah, he'll get it this time. It's so clearly evident. We see this, we see that. He was already discussing that with members of staff at school. We were talking to him about it because I think he was year 9, I think, when he went through second time. So obviously really aware as to what was going on. So when it came out that he has this language disorder, we were like, what? Where's this come from? And my initial thought was, are you kidding me? Did you get him? Did you hear what he said? Because I was there with him in the speech and language, and I was just thinking, oh, not again. But when we actually sat down with the speech and language therapist afterwards and we had some follow-up sessions, and then they started working with the school more directly, and he's had a lot of work since, it all just started to make sense. And actually afterwards, my feeling was, thank goodness we went through the second time. Although it was a bit of a roller coaster because we were the school were pushing because we needed to get his EHCP done. Actually, what he's got out of it is exactly what he needed. I don't know if we'll go through the process again. I think for him in school, in education, he's had what he needs in terms of the right kinds of tools and supports. We don't know what will happen in further education. It's a GCSE year. We don't know what will happen now. But I think we've got what we needed to get him to where he is now. So I feel grateful that actually the speech and language therapist stopped and said, hold on a minute, I think we're looking at something else, when everybody else was saying no. So yeah, a mixed bag. At the time I was a bit what, but now I'm very grateful that the process actually slowed down and we got it right.
Yeah, absolutely. And that you feel like you got the right tools in place. I mean, that's just key, isn't it? Because when you go through diagnosis, that's really what you're wanting, is the fact you want your child to have the right tools, the right support, the right understanding around them to be able to achieve and thrive.
Yeah.
And I think being able to get to that point where you can stand back and go, okay, well, that's happened. It's like, well, that's amazing. That's where we wanted to be. So that's really great.
Yeah, it's good. I think because we had a very early ADHD diagnosis, we've been seen continuously by community paediatrics because he used medication from primary school time really regularly. So we're very lucky that they've seen him and seen him and seen him and seen him and seen him, and they know him will do the right thing.
Yeah.
Our final questions are coming to the end now, and we're thinking about any parents who might be listening to us and thinking that resonates with us, or I've been through similar, that are going through the assessment process or have a child who's newly diagnosed. Kelly, what would your advice be to those parents?
So I guess in the process, you might wait a short time or a long time. And if you're waiting for a long time, then it's going back to doing all your research. Because if you come out with a diagnosis, you're going to have to start that process then. So you may as well start early. Check out what the services actually do offer around you. So, we've had that discussion about CAMHS teams. Do they offer what you want from them? Or is what you're looking for, could it be offered elsewhere? that you might not need a diagnosis for? Could you access counselling services? Can you access support services? You know, thinking about that process of say me being a clinician in a CAMHS team, that is a team essentially that every county will have, but it's a team that is dealing with moderate to severe mental health disorders. And there should be a couple more peers underneath that team that is picking up, doing the early intervention stuff, doing the counselling work. And quite often you find that in the third sector. So charities, support projects that go on around schools. So just check them out. Don't sit on the wait list and wait. See what's out there. Specialist OT is like gold dust and they're amazing. Even if you get a diagnosis, you're not still likely to see one depending on where you are in the country. If you are able to access one privately whilst you are on the wait list, you might get a whole heap of information that can help a diagnosis or actually gives you loads of strategies whilst you're in the process. Yeah, I think it's just start. As soon as you suspect, as soon as you get onto a pathway, just start, because your child is not going to change after diagnosis. Your child will still be the same child, and the earlier you get your strategies in, the better.
Fantastic. Alice, I already know you give fantastic advice, because whether you remember, you were one of the first people that I reached out to on Instagram when we started the Autism Dogs process. Alice gave me some fantastic advice about fundraising and things. But what would your advice be to a family who's going through this quite difficult time of assessment?
Lean on the support network around you. As we all know, you have to take every minute, hour, day at a time, and it will change drastically between those different time periods. 1 minute you think you've got it sorted, and literally the next minute you're in a puddle on the floor and you have no idea who you are. So embrace it, but lean on that network around you. I think it's an African proverb that says it takes a village to raise a child, and obviously that's a normal child's development. It's deemed as a shared responsibility of many people, not just parents. And don't feel alone on this journey, because it takes a lot to provide a safe, healthy environment for a neurotypical child, let alone the complexity of neurodiversity into that equation. So you kind of need a city rather than a village. And what that city looks like will be different to all of us. And I think it's embracing those kind of third parties, like you say, that aren't necessarily part of your world when you're, before diagnosis. Embrace with it now, because you will need them. And I think engage with them. You don't necessarily have to be going to coffee mornings or going to visits or anything like that, but it's just knowing that they're there, reading the Facebook groups, the Instagram posts, the kind of podcasts that you could listen to when you were having a bath or whatever it is. It's just kind of embracing that kind of knowledge. And I also think advocate for your child. You know them best. No matter what professionals say, you do know your child, so stick to your guns. It's exhausting because you have to put your armor on every time you have a conversation or discussion with a professional. So pick your battles as well. Like we said before, everything's a battle, everything you have to fight for. So the diagnosis doesn't stop that, unfortunately. Get your diagnosis, like I said, with Horatio, they then tried to discharge. Everyone discharged him. Dietitians, salts, everyone discharged him. So I've had to pick my battles over time and understand what's the priority today, this week, this moment. And that doesn't make you a failure to let stuff slide sometimes, because it allows you to remain strong. So just embrace that. And when you take that armor off and you do collapse into that puddle on the floor, that's normal and that's okay. My son has no voice, so I know the importance of kind of having his voice. So I have to advocate for him more. And I think, Emma, like you said it with your friend, when you're in the park and you just think, how I'm not coping, etc., etc. It's okay if all you do today is survive, like one day at a time, take it on as it is. Like you just have to get through it, and the next day will come and it'll bring its other challenges, but just embrace it and lean on the people around you.
Absolutely. I think in the terms of that, I think one of the things, like you referred to there and what Dan mentioned before, those light bulb moments where it just kind of settles in your brain. For my husband, it was the term of, imagine Max been sat on a bench on his own and you're sat on a different bench, and all you've done throughout this whole process is try and pull Max to the bench you're on, where really he's having a great time over on his bench and he's more than happy. Instead, we're going to be happy on our individual benches instead of pulling everyone to the same place and saying, you have to behave like this. Dan, coming full circle between you and Sue, what would be your number one advice for parents in this situation?
Yeah, just like reiterating what Alice and Kelly and what we've all said, it is a battle. It's a battle, and be prepared to battle. I saw a good meme. It's more based around parents going into the SEN battle, and the first image was a fresh-faced soldier straight out of basic training, day one, and then the second image was 3 years down the line, and you're looking at a D-Day guy coming off the D-Day battle site. It's not that bad, but it is still a battle, and as Alice said, you are the voice of your child. Kelly's probably heard this loads. You guys have all probably heard it. The voice of the child is important, and you will have to be that person. In school, they will mask, and so a lot of people go, "Oh, they're not like that." You see them at their best and their worst, but you see them at their autistic best, if that kind of makes sense. So you see the autism in full flow, so you know exactly what it's like. So you have to be their voice. Research, do your own research. I actually saw that Chris Packham documentary, which was helpful. But the one that really helped me as a as Charlie calls me, neuro boring, typical dad, Paddy McGuinness, that show he did. I don't know if you guys caught that. And it was like he was chatting to me direct about him going through the journey that we were going through. And so there's lots out there, and it's becoming normal now. Autism is becoming a normal. Big shout out to Curry's. They do a sensory day or a sensory hour where they turn the lights down and it's all quiet, and so you can wander around the store and not be zapped with lights and stuff. So it is worth it. The other thing as well, myth busting, and I'll freely admit that when I first heard about autism, it's hereditary and there is no cure, was basically my lesson I had to learn. Really, and I'll put my hand up. I thought it was something that would happen, but no, it's hereditary. You're born like it. However, having the diagnosis means that schools and employers, under the Discrimination Act, can put in make reasonable adjustments. Like Sue, for example, she's on the pathway and her work's already making the reasonable adjustments. So they've got a room with the lights can be turned down and it's sensory rooms and things like that. And so reasonable adjustments can be made. The world is in a better place, I think, on that. And then the final bit, your child needs to understand their diagnosis, and you need to let them explore it and let them understand what it means to them as well, and what it means in their little group of friends or their community. We all know people say, "Oh, you don't look autistic." Well, no, that's not a thing. And just because one autistic person does this, another autistic person doesn't do that. So they have different traits. It all means something different to that individual, and so allow them the time to explore that. And then like what Kelly says, once you go on the pathway, you get signposted to websites, signposted to groups. Take advantage of it. Understand what it means. If you don't get the diagnosis, you then still have been given tools and skills on how to help with a neurodiverse person in your life. So stick with it. It's a battle, but it's worth it.
Another thing, like from what Dan just said, is that there's good people in the system as well. We kind of can be very easy to badmouth the system. This is very close to my home, but my sister was a teacher, and she worked as a TA in special needs school while she was doing her teacher training. And she's now gone back to school and college and uni and is now an educational psychologist because of the impact of kind of seeing the journey that we've been on. And there's people in there that, like Kelly, that are very close to this and they understand it. And it's not always the systems against you. And sometimes it feels like that, but actually there's some really good people in that system that know it's hard and know it's difficult. Just remember that as well, because sometimes it feels like everyone's against you.
Yeah, I think you're so right, Alice. I think you could probably separate it and say the system doesn't work, but there's the people in it do. And I think it's key to remember that, because sometimes when you feel frustrated and angry, it's really important that that's not directed at somebody, because often it's not somebody, it's often a system that's not working for you in the way that that's been set up. But I think what's kind of come out, especially from what, you know, you've said, Dan and Alice, about kind of it being a battle, like, it's very true. It's something, again, that would resonate with me. And my daughter's, my eldest, she was out of education from about the age of 13 onwards, but I really firmly believe that education doesn't stop at school. So we kept her in the system, but I educated her at home. And the last day of her high school, she came out of her her hires. So it's just after GCSEs, but before A-levels. So she came out of her hires, and I took a picture expecting it to be this moment of triumph. And I didn't share that picture with anyone because I looked at it and I looked exhausted. I looked absolutely beaten by something I wasn't even trying to fight against, but I was just a bit broken. And I think that there can be so many positives. You know, Dan, you've shared about where Charlie's at the moment. There can be so many positives that it is a battle, but it doesn't mean that it will always be a battle, and that there are really difficult times. But I suppose anyone who's listening, there's so many positives as well. That just remember that when the dark clouds are overhead, they do move on. There is blue skies too. So, and I think, Dan, you said something super critical as well that I just wanted to mention, which was supporting your young person to understand their diagnosis and understand their brain. Absolutely key, because that will support their mental health. It'll support them in their relationship with their peers and their understanding of the world around them. It's just couldn't be more important to give your young person the space to understand themselves. It's just massive, and a real gift for a child to be able to be given that time to understand themselves, I think is huge. Kelly, Dan, Alice, thank you so much for joining us tonight, for giving us your insight. It's been such a pleasure chatting and sharing your journey, your thoughts. And it's funny how each of our journeys are quite unique, and yet I think there's been so much nodding of heads tonight, because I think we've all understood a lot of shared emotions and a lot of shared feelings. So thank you so much for your time and sharing with us all that you've been through.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you all so much, and we're hoping that the sharing won't stop there. We would love for anyone who's listening to get involved at home. So if you head along to the Autism Dogs Charity Facebook page or our Instagram pages, share your experience there. There'll be a question posted after today's podcast goes live, and we would love to hear the community's thoughts and share your journey. Until next time, everybody, thank you so much. It's goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.